Alright, today was my first day of my psychiatry rotation. I just finished neurology last week, took my shelf and my OSCE, so now I'm moving on to psych. It's really a nice transition, from neuro into psych because those fields are pretty related. But today was just an introduction. I had a virtual orientation in the morning with the clerkship director, had a lecture on the mental status exam, which is a really big part of psychiatry. And then I had a few more orientations more specific to the hospitals that I'm going to be rotating at. So the way that my schedule is going to work out is I'm going to spend 4 weeks at one hospital, and then 2 weeks at a different one. That other one I'm only going to do inpatient there because sort of like my main hospital doesn't have an inpatient unit, so I have to go to a different one for those few weeks. So after the virtual orientation, I had to drive up to the hospital that I'm doing my inpatient weeks at. Me and one other student are only doing 2 weeks there, but then I think there was like 6 other students that are doing their whole rotation there. So we all went, met with the site director, and just got like a tour of the unit and then also like the emergency psychiatric area. Then after that, I had another sort of like virtual orientation with my sort of main site where I'm spending the other 4 weeks. It wasn't really a tour, which I'm kind of thankful for. I didn't want to drive like all the way to the other hospital. I was just like a virtual meeting with the site director there to introduce himself, talk a little bit about the program, and to meet us, obviously. So in terms of my schedule, I am actually starting on inpatient. So tomorrow I'll be going back to that hospital I went to today. I don't really know what to think about this week yet. I mean, I have heard from my friends who have already done psych that they ended up liking it a little bit more than they thought they would, but we'll see how I feel about it after a few days. So like I said, that is my first 2 weeks. Then I go to EPS, which is like Emergency Psychiatric Services. So that's anytime someone comes to the emergency department and they have some sort of psychiatric crisis, whether it's suicidal ideation, homicidal ideation, maybe they're brought by the police for mania. Sometimes, people who are really paranoid will come. I have a little bit of experience with that just from our emergency medicine rotation. So usually anytime someone comes into the ED for that, they'll still be seen by an EM doctor, but then, once they figure out it's really more of a psychiatric issue, they'll call the psychiatrist to come and see them. So I'll kind of be on the other side of that interaction where I will be with the psychiatric team going to see patients. Then after that, I have 1 week of outpatient, and then I finish with 2 weeks of consult. Honestly, don't really know too much about consult. I assume it's for patients who are like already admitted to the hospital for a different reason, and the primary team needs some help from the psychiatry team. Alright, so it is Wednesday after my second day on the inpatient unit, so I thought I would talk about my experience. So in terms of the general workflow of what I've been doing, I have been told to get to the hospital around 8. I go to the resident room, meet up with the residents, start just chart checking all the patients, see if there was anything that happened overnight, see if we got assigned any new patients by the EPS team, read up on them. And then around 8:30 we go into the unit and then meet up with the attending. So this is sort of the first big difference between psych and pretty much every other specialty I've rotated on. Usually how it works is you'll get there early, be assigned a patient, chart check on them, go and see them, and sort of prepare a presentation to go over during rounds. The residents will do the same thing for their patients. And that's kind of how rounds work, is sometimes you sit at a table and everyone goes around, presents their patient, you talk about them. Then after you might do walking rounds where you actually go and see them. Sometimes there's only walking rounds, so you have to like have everything written down and kind of give the presentation right outside of the patient room. But this is very different where, yes, we prepped to see if there was any overnight events and just get a general background on the patients. But then in terms of going and seeing them, we do it all as a team. So we round with, it was me, So one medical student, one resident, and then an attending. And most of the time there's also a social worker with us. So everyone's first time seeing the patient of the day is at that time. Like I said, very different from other services where if you go back during walking rounds, it's your second, third time seeing them as the student or the resident. So going and seeing them as a team, we will find the patient either in their room or in sort of like a common area. Sometimes we will do the interview in the common area in their room. There are separate like interview rooms as well for some more privacy. So we all kind of like conduct the interview together, which also I kind of like. Most of the time it was the resident because they're sort of the one has to learn the most about this field because they're actually going into it. Sometimes the attending would do it, especially if it was a new patient, and then usually for one of the patients of the day, I would lead the interview, and then the resident or attending would chime in when either I missed something or they wanted clarification. So like I said, I kind of like that workflow. It makes everything a lot less stressful. Something that I think a lot of students are worried about, especially on inpatient psychiatry, is going into a room and being left alone with the patient, because sometimes they're in there for homicidal ideation or violent behavior. Going into an environment that might not be the safest can be, very stressful, but thankfully in this way, I felt safe the whole time. It was really nice to do everything as a team, and also it was nice because I knew that I wasn't really going to be missing anything, because if I forgot to ask a question, the resident or the attending would ask it. So I think it's just like a lot more collaborative of a way to do it, and it allowed us to spend more time with patients because it's not like, oh, I needed to do my full assessment, then the resident, then the attending, and then we went to rounds. Like, we're doing it all at the same time, so you can kind of combine all of that individual time together. Then after we saw all of our patients, we would go back to the resident room, run the list real quick, just see like, oh, is anyone getting discharged today? What medications do we need to change around? Then we would grab lunch and then like write notes in the afternoon, and then call patients' families. So both these days so far have been there from like 8 to 2, which I cannot complain about at all. Neuro was pretty similar. It was usually like 7 to 4. So once again, not too bad, but this is definitely a little bit more relaxed. Alright, it is now Sunday. The rest of the week went pretty much same as the other days. However, Thursday got off a little bit early because us and the residents both had didactics. So they had lectures starting at 12, ours started at 1. So at 12, they were kind of done with their clinical responsibilities for the day, so I went home, ate something, and then had lecture from like 1 to 4:30. That's how every week is going to work. So I really like how that is set up, where there's sort of a dedicated time for our lectures during the clerkship week. Some of our clerkships don't do it like that, where they will just have random lectures spread throughout the whole week, whether it is Monday at 8 a.m., Thursday at 12, Friday at 5. Like, it just doesn't really matter. It's just kind of random. I don't love that. I prefer when there's one specific time for everything. So thankfully Psych is like that. And then Friday, very normal day. I was there from like 8 to 2:30. This weekend has been really nice. This morning went and ran along the beach, which is slowly becoming one of my favorite things to do. In terms of how Psych is going, so far, I honestly really like it. Like I said earlier in the video, I do like this sort of setup of rounds and how it is a lot lower stress, lower stakes. I don't have to worry about, coming up with a perfect presentation to give the attending. It's just a lot more informal and just very educational. I don't know if it's always like this or just because the residents are very new. So the only resident on my team is a PGY1, and it's July, so that means she only started a few weeks ago. I'm honestly very impressed of how much she knows already with only being a doctor for a few weeks. I also think it's nice that we get to spend a lot more time with patients. The initial psychiatric interview for a new patient is, maybe 45 minutes long, which you really never are talking to a patient that much in any other specialty. The only time you're going to be spending that long with a patient is if you're doing a procedure. The other very interesting thing this week has been calling family members. In psychiatry, they call it collateral. So, in other specialties, you do call family members from time to time, usually in like IM or EM, where they come in and maybe they don't know what medications they take, so you have to call their spouse or their kid or someone just to get some verification of like their medical history. But with psychiatry, a lot of the patients who are admitted to the inpatient unit are, people who maybe have schizophrenia, or people who are very paranoid, people who, the reason they're in there is because of suicidal ideation or, a suicide attempt. So in these cases, it's really important to get information from their family or their loved ones about, what led up to this, what are they like in their day-to-day life, has this been something gradual or something all of a sudden. It's usually very revealing because unfortunately the patients when the patients are in that state, they're sometimes not the most reliable. So we really count a lot on the collateral to help get a full picture of what the patient is going through. So all in all, I have enjoyed this week. I do have one more week of inpatient psych before I move on to something else. So I'll continue to learn and be able to talk a lot more about this next week.